Hello, welcome to the Run Testers. My name's Nick, and in this video we're going to be comparing the Asics Metaspeed Sky Tokyo and the Puma Fast-R Nitro Elite 3. So the Metaspeed Sky Tokyo and the Fast-R 3 are two of the very best carbon plate racing shoes on the market. They're the two shoes that I rank more highly than any others. In fact, myself, they're the two I'm always deciding between when I'm heading for an A race, and they're really exceptionally high performance for races of any distance. So both will definitely help you run fast. I've PB'd in both of these shoes, but which will suit you best, I guess, is the question we're going to try and answer in this video. When it comes to the price of them, they're fairly similar, but the Puma is more expensive. It costs £260 or $300, whereas the Asics is £240 or $270. The Asics is actually the lighter shoe, but both of these are exceptionally light, even within the world of carbon plate racing shoes. The Metaspeed Sky Tokyo weighs 169 grams or 6 ounces in a UK 9, whereas the Puma is 187 grams or 6.6 ounces, also in a UK 9. You've got a 5mm drop on the Metaspeed Sky Tokyo with a stack height of 39.5mm at the heel, 34.5 at the forefoot. The Puma has an 8mm drop, a stack height of 40mm at the heel, 32 at the forefoot. So when it comes to the design of the two shoes, with the Asics you've got a Motion Wrap 3.0 upper, a very lightweight and breathable material with minimal padding and support around the back, as you'd expect in a racing shoe. A dual density midsole with two different foams used. The top layer is FF Turbo Plus, which was the foam used on the Metaspeed Paris series of the shoe. Then you've got Asics' soft and springy FF Leap foam on the bottom, which is lighter and bouncier than the FF Turbo Plus. It's the stuff that was introduced with the Metaspeed Ray. Then you have a full length carbon plate running between those foams, and that plate sits quite high in the forefoot on the Metaspeed Sky Tokyo, which differentiates it from the Edge Tokyo and probably most of the carbon shoes actually out there. You've got a slightly higher carbon plate with the Sky Tokyo. You have an Asics grip outsole with pretty minimal coverage though. Even the forefoot's just got a thin layer of lots of holes on it. Not too much covering the back of the shoe either. Then when it comes to the Puma Fast-R 3, you've got a very lightweight, minimal mesh upper, see-through translucent material there just to exemplify how light it is. You've got a Nitro Elite midsole. This is a nitrogen-infused aliphatic TPU foam, and you can see Puma's done lots of different cutaways and almost decoupled the midsole to reduce weight there. You've got a full-length carbon power plate running through that midsole, and then a Puma grip outsole with extensive coverage. It is quite a thin layer, but it's a very good material in terms of grip, but neither shoe is really built for durability, it's fair to say. It's all about running fast.
Okay, so the fit for me in both of these elite race shoes. So the Asics Metaspeed Sky Tokyo, I'm an 8 in the UK. I've got size 8 in both of these shoes in the UK, and found the Asics to be very comfortable. There's plenty of space for my big toe and around the sides of the forefoot. And in fact, the midfoot isn't as narrow as you might expect from some race shoes. It's definitely quite comfortable. I definitely had a little bit of space in there. The back of the shoes, there's a nice little bit of padding on it as well. There's not really any padding around anywhere else on the upper. It's very lightweight, but I did find it very easy to get a nice comfortable fit, and there was a little bit of extra space in the midfoot, which I don't always get in an elite race shoe. The Puma is very similar. There's actually it's a little bit longer for me. There's a little bit more space for my big toe, not to the extent that I would say size down at all, but there's definitely a little bit more space there. The fronts of the shoe, the forefoot, pretty similar to the Sky Tokyo. The only difference, or the main difference, is the midfoot. I think it's a little bit narrower in the Puma than in the Asics. So keep that in mind if you do have wider feet. I've got fairly average width feet, but I did feel that I was at the limit of this shoe. The rest of it is pretty similar actually. The level of padding around the sides and the back and the tongue is all pretty much the same. So yeah, both of these shoes I'd definitely stay to my UK size 8 in. They've got a similar fit apart from that midfoot. But very comfortable shoes when it comes to racing.
So when it comes to fit of the two shoes, we've got the same size for both, which is a UK 9, US 10. That's the same size I use across the Asics and Puma ranges. Now within the Asics range, I think the Metaspeed fits a little bit more tightly than shoes like the Nova Blast and the Nimbus. So if you're near the front of those shoes, you might want to size up in the Metaspeed, but I find the fit is spot on for me. It's fairly close and tight and dialed in, which is what I want for racing without putting any pressure on my toes or anything like that. So the fit is great in the Asics. Puma is a little bit longer than the Asics, I would say. I have more room in front of my toes. It's been fine. I've run a marathon and other races in the shoe, but potentially I could have gone half a size down in that. So even though they are the same size, I do think the Puma fits a little bit longer. I think it's maybe slightly narrower than the Asics around the toes as well. Now, the fit's been fine for me with both of them in my normal size, but there are those little things to think about. The fit's been very good around the heel and midfoot with both shoes though. So as I mentioned at the start of the video, I'm a big fan of both of these shoes. I do think they're the top 2 racing options on the market for me. And I've done a lot of running in both of them as a result. I've done about 100k in the Puma Fast-R 3, which has included the London Marathon, which is my second fastest marathon. I've run my 5-mile PB in the shoe as well in an Asics race and done a fast park run as well, plus a lot of hard training. And then in the Asics, I just recently set my half marathon PB in the shoe at the weekend, and I've run about 160k in it in total with lots of hard training runs as part of my marathon build-up for the Loch Ness Marathon. So loads of runs in both of them. Every single time I've run them, I've been impressed with how fast they are. And I do think, if you pick up either of these, you're going to get a very good racing shoe. But I do think they feel quite different on the run, actually. I brought the Puma out again recently to remind myself of the feel of it. And it definitely has a different feel to the Asics shoe, all of the Asics Metaspeed shoes, really, which I've been using a lot of late. Puma has a firmer, I think, more aggressive ride with the very pronounced rocker on it. It's bit more mechanical almost. It really positions your foot in the place it wants to be, so you really roll through perfectly off that extended carbon plate, off your big toe, and that does mean it doesn't always feel as fun or as nice to run in as the Asics, but it certainly feels very fast to run in. Like I did a track session in it recently. I was just cruising around. I was going, yeah, these don't feel as bouncy and soft as the Asics shoes and the Metaspeed Sky Tokyo in particular, but hitting my paces really well here, heart rate's good, I feel very efficient, and that's been the case every single time I've run in the Puma. That efficiency is really there, and I'm always running faster than I'm expecting when I'm in that shoe, and that's even true in the second half of a marathon when I thought I was starting to fall apart at London. I was actually holding a pretty solid pace in the shoe to run a really good time for me. Done runs just to feel and heart rate in the shoe to see what kind of pace comes out, and again, it was a lot harder than I thought, so it's an exceptionally fast shoe for sure, but I don't think it's quite as soft and springy as the Asics or as cushy, and I think maybe it's a bit harder on the body as a result because it does put you in a certain position that it wants you to run, and you're a little bit dictated to by the shoe, and the results are very good, but it can weigh you down a little bit, and I think over the course of longer races like the marathon, that might not be to everyone's tastes. The Asics does have a softer, springier ride. It doesn't direct you in the same way the Puma does. I don't think the rocker is quite as pronounced. You get a bit more bounce from the shoe, and it's a bit softer underfoot, and what I really like about the Sky Tokyo is that high plate in the forefoot, which I find gives me a really poppy and responsive feel, and it means I feel like I'm getting a lot of propulsion out of the Asics, even when I'm starting to slow down or struggle in a race in the back half of a race. I don't feel like I have to really stamp into it or put a lot of force into it to get a load of bounce back. I think the bounce comes really easily from that plate in the forefoot, and it really helped in the second half of the half marathon at the weekend when I was running by myself, just trying to maintain a pace over slight undulations and stuff like that. Always felt like the Asics was giving me a lot back and putting me in a good position to run fast and helping along the way. And it is a different ride feel to the Puma, and I think you get a bit more maybe cushioning and protection from the Asics because it is a bit softer, and maybe there's a little trade-off there in terms of not always being so strictly in the correct position as you are with the Puma, which really does roll you through so quickly, but I think the Asics is slightly more forgiving as a result. It's not very stable though. I don't think either of these shoes are particularly stable, but I do think the Asics is maybe a little bit more forgiving if your form is starting to go a bit. I'd say on both shoes, I wouldn't expect a lot of durability. Like with the Asics, you don't get the full outsole coverage at the back there, so I do rip up a little bit of the foam at the back of it as a heel striker. Hasn't really affected performance though, I will say. Puma seems to rate the Fast-R 3 for like 300 kilometers of running, so I'm a third of the way into that now. You can see this dent that I've got. I think other people have noticed it as well, where the outsole is bending in a little bit, maybe around the shape of the carbon plate or something like that. Again, doesn't seem to be affecting performance or anything like that, but these are both shoes that you probably should save for race day. A bit more than I have in terms of racking up a lot of training miles for our reviews and stuff like that. But yeah, they're still performing really well, but I wouldn't be picking up these shoes expecting 1,000 miles out of them or anything like that. There are carbon races that are a bit more durable, but these are very lightweight shoes that, as a result, do trade off durability. I did do a short run in both shoes at the same time, and one thing that did come out across to me that I hadn't really thought about before I did that run in both shoes at the same time is a slightly fuller feeling you get from the Asics, which actually is one of the few carbon shoes without extensive cutouts on the bottom there, which is pretty amazing given how light it is. You do get a fuller ground contact from it as a result, and you really feel the extra bounce you get from that shoe compared to the Puma, whereas this feels really aggressive, really nimble, really driving you forward and rolling you off that extended carbon plate. And it doesn't feel as cushy, but it feels very, very fast for sure, and the rocker is a lot more pronounced, I think, than the one on the Asics, which dials a bit more into the bounce.
Okay, so this year, these two shoes are two of the big ones, two of the best ones that we've tested, and definitely two of the best ones that I've tested. And I think this is a really interesting versus because they are both fantastic. They're both right at the top of the list. And they're both very similar in a lot of ways. I've really enjoyed running in both of these shoes. And I've done, I think I've done probably 3 park runs in both of these shoes now, and I know I've done 10k in both of these. I haven't done a half marathon in either of them. I would like to do that, but I've only got up to 10k racing in these shoes. Let's start with the Puma. So the Puma is really, it feels really fast and aggressive when you're running in it. Definitely feels like a shoe that is tipping you forward. It feels like a shoe that is giving you a lovely little bit of snap back from that plate in combination with the midsole. It just feels like it's making you run quickly. When I ran a 10k race in this shoe, it just felt like the turnover was very, very quick and nippy. But it did feel a little bit aggressive, and that's probably not for everyone. I definitely think this is a shoe that is definitely for the seasoned runner or the more elite runner, because it really does put your foot in a position that makes you run quickly. It's not a natural feeling shoe. The Sky Tokyo, now similar level. It does feel it's a very fast shoe. Clearly, it's definitely a shoe that is designed for getting PBs. The new version of this I really, really like. So the updated foam, the FF Leap, is a little bit bouncier, a little bit softer for me, and it's a shoe that I would say is a little more natural than the Puma. It's still a very fast shoe. It still really does make you run fast, but in a slightly different way. I feel that the Puma sort of pushes you forward, tips you onto that toe, and really sets you off with that bouncy midsole foam. Whereas I think most of the speed and efficiency from the Sky Tokyo comes from the bounce, and it's a more natural ride, despite the fact that it is a very, very fast shoe. So in the 10Ks that I ran in both of these, I think they're comparable. I don't think I'm going to get a faster time in either of these shoes, especially over 10K distance. I think for me, the difference really comes down to the distance that I'm running. And for me, I'd probably say that I'd cap out maybe half marathon in the Puma, just because the way it rides, the feel of it, it's a little bit aggressive for me. And I don't think I'd enjoy it over marathon distance. I think I'd feel a little bit uncomfortable towards the end of it. I don't think that's the case for every runner, and I much prefer more cushioned, comfortable shoes, which is why I preferred the Asics. Is the midsole in the Asics just feels a little bit bouncy, a little bit more natural, and a little bit more comfortable for me. So I'll definitely be happy to run a marathon in this shoe. So yeah, the only thing I would say as well is the outsole. For me, it's actually been pretty good on the Asics. I was a bit worried every time I wear a super shoe. I do tend to rip this rubber on the outsole, but Asics super shoes does this interesting thing where it's connected to the front rubber. So normally what I do is I rip this bit of the rubber off if it's like that the other side, but Asics doesn't do that. It has this sort of long stretchy one. So if you do rub the rubber on the outside of the shoe, Asics is quite good at protecting against that because of the way the rubber's built. But it doesn't feel like the most durable outsole on here because that midsole is fairly open to the ground. The Puma, I have noticed quite a bit of rubbing on it, but I still haven't ripped off the actual rubber on the outside of it. So you can see there that I've ripped or I've rubbed quite a lot of the outsole off, but the rubber is still okay. But I wouldn't say either of these shoes has a particularly impressive outsole at the back. The front of the Puma is actually really heavy duty. It's got a really thick layer of rubber on that front outsole, but it is quite smooth. So I say it wasn't great for traction, and not amazing on the Asics either. So neither's got a particularly impressive outsole. Okay, my verdict on these two shoes. They are both fantastic shoes, and anything up to half marathon, I think I'd be hard pressed to choose between these two shoes because I think they would be equal in the amount of performance gains I get from them, and I think neither of them would have any sort of negative impact on me running a race. I think they're both very, very fast and probably the two fastest shoes out at the moment. I think it really comes down to the ride and the feel of the ride. So the performance, I think, is equal. I think it's really what you're more comfortable running with. I think the Puma is a bit more aggressive. It feels a little bit harsher to run in. It feels a little bit more like it's putting your foot into a position that makes you run faster. That's great if you like that. If you're a more seasoned runner who can deal with that, great. You're probably going to go for the Puma. I think the Asics Metaspeed Sky Tokyo is probably just a little bit more accessible. For me, I like a little bit more bounce. I like a little bit more of a natural ride. I like a little bit less of an aggressive feel, especially if I'm running longer distances. And I think the Metaspeed Sky does that but they are very, very close. And any sort of differences between the two are quite minimal. But between these two, I'm definitely going to go for the Asics Metaspeed Sky Tokyo, and I would definitely pick it if I was doing a marathon, because I do think I'd find the Puma a little bit more awkward to run in over marathon distance.
A verdict: these are both absolutely excellent carbon plate racing shoes, and I would trust both of them in any kind of race, really. Like, it's going to be a constant decision for me which one I'm going to pick for a race, and I've PB'd in both and would happily run any distance in them. But you do get a softer, springier ride with the Asics, whereas the Puma has that very efficient rockered feel. So it might be a case of what you prefer out of those two types of rides, but I think maybe over the course of something like a marathon, probably more people might get on better with the softer feeling of the Asics. It's not the most stable, but it does give you a little bit more of a cushioned feel than the Puma, and that might help, especially for me with Loch Ness coming up. Loch Ness Marathon in Scotland is a pretty fast marathon with lots of downhills as well as uphills, and I think maybe the cushier ride of the Asics would suit that a bit better than the Puma, which I think really excels on those classic city marathons, the majors, where you are just getting into a rhythm and holding that pace the whole time on good flat courses with not too many turns. Like, it's so good at holding a pace, the Puma. I think that's where it's a job that it does better than the Asics, I think, because you are just rolling with that rocker really, really well, and even as you tire and start to break down the second half of a race, it will keep you going and getting near your pace, at least if you are starting to really struggle. So yeah, it's really hard for me to call it. I won't really give a definitive verdict here, but the Asics, I suppose, has some objective advantages, which is that it's a little bit cheaper and a little bit lighter, probably a little bit more available as well, because the Puma's been selling out so fast, so that might push a few people there. But there's no definitive answer to which one I prefer. I think right now, if you gave me a flat city centre circuit from 5k to the half marathon, I'd probably just about lean towards the Puma, and in the marathon, I'd probably just about lean towards the Asics. But I'd be very happy in either. These are great shoes, and like I say, they're my top two options available from any brand right now. That's a comparison of the Asics Metaspeed Sky Tokyo and the Puma Fast-R 3. Please do like and subscribe, ring the little bell, and we will see you next time on the channel.